Good morning, good afternoon. Hello, SBA. Welcome to today's Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Before we get started, there are a couple of reminders. I'd like to let you know that today's program is being recorded, and a recording of the program will be available on the ODICR SharePoint site by the end of this week. For those who find it necessary to use closed captioning during the program, if you look to the top of your screen, under More Actions, select that and the closed captioning will present itself for you. And the final reminder is that at the end of this fireside chat, we are so looking forward to having our guest speaker speak with us this afternoon. We will have the exciting opportunity to ask him questions about himself, his mission, what he's doing, and things like that. So I don't want to waste too much time. So what I'd like to do is to now introduce you to SBA's first Chief Diversity Officer, Ms. Sherry Brown, Ms. Sherry Thomas, who will give you some opening remarks. Sherry?
Thank you, Judette. Good morning, good afternoon. During this month, we honor generations of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, and we celebrate and honor the many contributions that they have made to the rich history, vibrant culture, and great achievements in our country. It is an honor and a privilege to welcome you to our special observance. I am Sherry Thomas, the Chief Diversity Officer, and thank you. Thank you for joining with us. You are in for a treat this afternoon. The Honorable Christopher P. Liu will be sharing his story and perspectives as the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations in a fireside chat with our very own Regional Administrator, Michael Fong. Before I invite Mr. Fong to come forward, I want to share several 2020 census nuggets of information with you. Did you know that 24 million people identified as Asian alone or in combination in the United States in 2020? 5.1 million is the estimated number of the Asian alone or in combination population of Chinese, except Taiwanese, descent in the United States in 2020. The Chinese, except Taiwanese population was the largest Asian group, followed by Asian Indian, Filipino, Vietnamese, Korean, and Japanese. 1.6 million is the estimated number of people that identified as Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander alone or in combination in the United States in 2020. And 619,000 is the number of Native Hawaiians in the United States in 2020. The Native Hawaiian population was the largest detailed Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander group, followed by Samoan and Chamorro. Representation matters, and you may be wondering, what are SBA stats for this community? Great question. I'm glad you asked. The fiscal year 21 SBA MD 715 numbers reflect an Asian population of 3.05% male and 3.3% female, which is highly encouraging since they exceed the civilian labor force metric. On the other hand, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders reflect only 0.13% male and 0.08% female. I am delighted to say that Ambassador Guzman and the SBA leadership is committed to doing the work to connect with the AA and NHPI communities. I now present to you Michael Fong, the Regional Administrator who oversees SBA programs, offices, and operations in the Pacific Northwest region, serving Alaska, Idaho, Oregon, and Washington, where he is leading efforts to prioritize the region's $160 million allocation of American Rescue Plan Act funds for recovery from the pandemic. Thank you. Take it away, Mike.
Great. Let's see. Am I on? Looks like I'm on. Great. Hey, thanks, Sherry. Really appreciate your leadership and support, and appreciate the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, Civil Rights for all the work that you're doing to advance equity for our organization and for SBA. And it's been great to work with you. And a shout out to Judette Crosby. It has been great working with her as we put this program together today for the SBA family with Ambassador Lou. And I'm just going to start off with a couple of quick thoughts and reflections on ANHPI Heritage Month before we get to the main show here, if you will. But admittedly, I've only been with the agency since January, so I'm still pretty new here. And but when I got the call from Judette to see if I'd be interested in helping with this event, I said, "Babe, sure, what the heck, you know? I mean, happy to help out." And we are just incredibly fortunate to have been able to connect with Ambassador Lou, who's been so generous with his time to join us today for a conversation around ANHPI Heritage Month. But you know, as Sherry mentioned, I think we're just really excited to hear more about his journey, his perspective on community issues, his time in public service, and how his heritage and background has really influenced his career, and eager for all of us to learn a little bit more about his backstory. So, but for me, just wanted to mention a couple of things that have been top of mind, and maybe some things that we can all kind of think about as we go into the conversation with the ambassador today. So, I want to emphasize that one of the reasons that I was drawn to this opportunity with the SBA was that I consistently heard from Administrator Guzman and other members of leadership within the organization just the importance of working toward centering equity in that work that we do, especially now in the context of recovery for so many small businesses from the pandemic. You know, and folks in my region have heard me say that, you know, we've often hear the reference about SBA wanting to have no wrong door philosophy when it comes to extending our reach through our resource partners for businesses to be able to access services. You know, but right now, I think the lesson that we can take away from the pandemic is that sometimes we may actually need to help create some doors to begin with, some new doors. And certainly in communities that don't have access, and given deeply rooted disparities that still stubbornly persist, institutional and structural barriers, it's important for us to kind of keep that in the forefront of our work going forward. And you know, in the early days of my work as regional administrator, we've made it a priority in the region to do outreach and engagement with small business owners in the AA and HPI communities in my 4 states of Alaska, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. And what I'm hearing is, you know, there are still lingering effects, not just from the pandemic itself and the impacts of the public health crisis, but also effects of stigmatization on the community, increase in hate crimes. And all of these contribute to the environment and ecosystem of how we should be thinking about our public service and work with these communities, just given the tremendous impacts, economic impacts that have occurred. So I just think some recognition of that as we think about how we extend our outreach into this phase of recovery work is important, and just wanted to make sure I pin that thought before we move into our conversation. The second is just a broader point about you know, AANHPI Heritage Month, opportunity to reflect, you know, and on the terminology itself. I want to make sure that we're thinking about this in the context of the term is you know, an opportunity for unity, affinity from different cultures and ethnic groups. An opportunity for allyship, that is very effective and powerful, particularly when it comes to dealing with public policy issues and issues that have broader implications that face our communities as a whole. But at the same time, want to make sure that we are also recognizing that there are incredible unique differences within the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community as well. Which is also some of that reasoning that drives us to want to go deeper when we disaggregate data and try to reinforce that the community here is not monolithic. So as we think about and reflect upon the ANHPI community contributions, the culture and history during the observance months, just want to make sure we are also holding space for that dichotomy, that we both celebrate the commonality and shared interests and shared experiences, but also keep at forefront that it is not a monolith, and important for us to be mindful of that in the work that we do. So just a couple of thoughts that I've been thinking about, since Judette asked me to do this, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. And I'm going to give a formal introduction to our special guest, and but also mindful of something else Judette mentioned to me, that I guess call it a public service announcement at this point. We are always interested in the organic fostering of employee resource group support around issues and common interests around this space. And I have been informed that we do not actually have an AANHPI employee resource group, or from my day back in the city, we would call it affinity groups. But so just something for us to think about. If there is that organic interest, we should start that conversation as well. So, and I'm sure Judette will give me a pat on the back for making that public service announcement today. So anyhow, well, let's get to the main attraction. So we are just incredibly fortunate today to have Ambassador Liu, who I actually just met recently, but we've been able to have some good dialogue leading up to today's conversation. I will do the obligatory formal introduction, which I'm sure Ambassador Liu has heard of himself hundreds, if not thousands of times, but we'll do that very quickly, and then we'll quickly turn to our fireside chat. And then again, as Judette mentioned, we're going to take questions a little bit closer to the end, but please, we'd love to have some back and forth dialogue and engagement once we get to that point here. So Ambassador Liu, let me pull up his bio, and I will try to be quick here. But Ambassador was sworn in as representative of the United States of America to the UN for Management and Reform on January 4th of 2022. And during his public service career, Chris has worked in all three branches of the federal government. From 2014 to 2017, he served as U.S. Deputy Secretary of Labor. He is the son of immigrants. Chris was only the second Asian American in history to become Deputy Secretary of any cabinet department. From 2009 to 2013, he served as the White House Cabinet Secretary and Assistant to the President, where he was President Obama's primary liaison to federal agencies. And during the Obama administration, Chris also co-chaired the White House Initiative on Asian American and Pacific Islanders, as well as the Diversity and Inclusion in Government Council. Prior to the service in the executive branch, Chris was legislative director and acting chief of staff for then Senator Obama. And then after Senator Obama was elected president, Chris was named executive director of Obama-Biden transition planning efforts. He is a lawyer by training, began his career as a law clerk for Judge Robert E. Cohen on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, and a litigation attorney at Sidley Austin. He has spent 8 years as Deputy Chief Counsel of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. A graduate of Princeton and Harvard Law School. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Liu to our, I guess, this is our first program together, Ambassador. so really great to have you. We've given the formal introduction of you, but I wonder, if you could just maybe give us just some opening thoughts in terms of sort of your background and maybe even just a little bit more about what does the UN Ambassador for Management and Reform do? And we'd love to get a primer on that before we get going here. So, Chris?
Well, Mike, thank you for the nice introduction, and thank you to SBA for having me. I'm such a huge fan of this agency, and during the Obama administration, as you said, I was basically the president's liaison to the cabinet. So I spent a lot of time working with former Administrator Karen Mills, who is still a very close friend. And so I know well the work that you do. And it was critically important during the pandemic, and not just for our community, but for all communities. And so we can talk more about that. I will admit, when the White House said, hey, do you want to go work at the UN? And they offered me this job, I also scratched my head and said, I don't really understand what this job is. And, I have spent my entire career in Washington doing domestic politics. So coming to the UN in New York was a completely different animal, but in some ways it flows perfectly with the work that I have done. We at the US mission to the UN have actually 5 ambassadors. The one you probably know the most is Ambassador Thomas Greenfield, who is the ambassador to the UN and is also a member of the president's cabinet. Underneath her, there are 4 other ambassadors who represent our interests at the UN. I have the management and reform portfolio, and essentially why that's important is that the US is the largest financial contributor to the UN, period. And so it is my job to make sure that our funds are used in the way that are consistent with US foreign policy. I am in charge of ensuring that the management of UN programs is consistent with US goals. And, I just kind of pitch in, and I'm kind of like a utility infielder on everything that goes on around here. And it is a crazy place at the UN. I mean that in a very nice way. There's 193 countries represented here. We've got, meetings on every topic under the sun all day long. And so oftentimes they just need an ambassador to show up and give remarks to the United States. And it is important because President Biden has really made a point that the US needs to engage in organizations like the UN. Our security interests are intimately tied with other countries, our allies. We also need to have an open dialogue with our adversaries, whether it's China or whether it's Russia. And, we see this playing out very particularly now over the last couple of months with the war in Ukraine, which is something that is occupying all of our times in New York. So when I talk to young people, I always tell people, like, look, get out of your zone, try new things. Don't be afraid to go out on a limb and experiment. And trust me, this is about the biggest going out on a limb, representing the United States on the world stage for somebody who spent his entire career, focusing on nuts and bolts of how we create jobs and how we, do the work of business in Washington. But it's been a lot of fun, and it's a huge honor.
Well, that's great. Thanks for that insight. It's very helpful. But you mentioned that your career in public service, and again, we've just talked very briefly about it in your introduction, but it really spans 4 decades, going all the way back to the early 90s when you started as a law clerk in the U.S. Court of Appeals, and obviously you've been intimately involved with ANHPI issues. Maybe some initial reflections on, as we go into, we're halfway through ANHPI Heritage Month. Just any thoughts about what the observance month kind of means to you? What does it sort of invite into your thought process as you think about, as we kind of try to engage our folks from our agency?
Yeah, I think it's an important time for us to reflect on the progress that our community has made. And I will apologize, the term AANHPI is unwieldy and relatively new. I just reflexively say Asian Americans, it flows easier for me, and I mean that as no disrespect or slight. It's just it's more of a it's just easier for me to remember. It's an opportunity for us to reflect on the progress that our community has made, and in all walks, whether it is not just public service, it's the arts, it's business, law, whatever you have. But I think it's also an important opportunity to reflect on the challenges still ahead. And I think we've seen acutely over the past couple of years with the pandemic how our community has suffered disproportionately. In the world that you all know very well, we know that Asian American small business owners have been disproportionately impacted. Many of them were public-facing entities. Again, it's small businesses, it's restaurants, it's nail salons, it's dry cleaners, it's small IT businesses. And when the country shut down, these companies also lost an important line of business. And so they were disproportionately impacted. And we also know that with a lot of the businesses in our community, these are family-run businesses that don't have, deep cash reserves. They certainly don't have long-established business practices. So, notwithstanding the well-meaning PPP program, which was implemented by your agency wonderfully, there were limited funds. A lot of Asian American businesses were unable to get that. And, my benchmark on this is always my neighborhood dry cleaner, and I've gone to them for 20 years, so they've become really like family. And I would go in there every week during the pandemic, even though, frankly, I had no shirts to bring, and just check and see how they were doing. And they were really hurting. They were really, really hurting. And so I think during the last 2 years, we've seen how our businesses have been disproportionately impacted. But I think more broadly, we have seen how our community really has been, and I'll say the word terrorized by this disturbing rise of hate crimes over the, and a lot of it is spurred by rhetoric aimed at the pandemic. Obviously, there's a strong anti-Chinese sentiment that's going on in our country right now. And I think it highlights that in many ways, our community, as well established as we are still too often seen as outsiders in this country. So the short answer is, Mike, is it's a chance for us to reflect on successes, but also still the challenges ahead.
Yeah, and Ambassador, I'm reminded in your comments that recently I did see, I think it was the Asian Chamber of Commerce released or shared some data that reinforced some of the points you made for sure. And in fact, particularly the anti-Asian, anti-Chinese sentiment, that the percentage of folks that are actually still equating COVID to China and Asian populations has actually increased since the pandemic. So it was it's striking to see that data, but also reinforces that those effects are still lingering, and like you, anecdotally, the conversations I've had in community talking with small business owners, there is still a deep sense of trepidation and some fear too, I think, and it just compounds the challenges that are already in play. But so tell us a little bit about, I read in your bio that I think you mentioned that your father was an engineer, but also had a keen interest in history and biographies of political figures, and that was part of your sort of I guess motivation and background as you move towards a career in public service. But tell us a little bit more, about just sort of your heritage and background, and sort of your role models and influences along the way that have helped you think about how to think about this work and through your career.
So both my parents were born in China. They left China after World War II during the Communist Revolution, moved to Taiwan for grade school, and then both came here for college. So, my father, I think, like, if any of you are children of immigrants, and I suspect many of you are, my dad came here. My parents came here without much language skills. And so an area that they could both excel in was sciences, engineering. So my father was an electrical engineer because that's how he could make a living. But that's not my dad's interest. My dad loved watching the evening news, and we would watch together and we talk about the news of the day. I still remember vividly watching the 1976 presidential debate with my father and debating the issues about Jimmy Carter versus Gerald Ford. My father took me to took me to Capitol Hill for the first time when I was 8 years old, and we met our local congressman. And so while he was an engineer, and I suspect this is like many of your parents, grandparents as well, while he was an engineer by training, that was not where his passions were. And so he really kind of instilled in me this love of politics. But he also instilled in me a desire to work for the government. My father was an electrical engineer with the Defense Department. He thought as an immigrant that there was no better way to give back to your country, especially a country that had been so good to him, than to serve in its government. And so the summer after my senior year of high school, before college, I was going to do just the typical thing that, high school seniors do. I was going to either go hang out at the beach or go flip burger somewhere. My dad said, no, I want you to fill out an SF-171, which you all should know is the form you fill out to apply for a federal job. And I applied for a summer job at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. I got the job and I worked there for a summer. They invited me back the next summer. And so I literally started as a GS2. And when I tell that story to people, people are like, whoa, I didn't even think there was a GS2. And so I was a GS2. I did really well that first summer, and they invited me back as a GS3. And so it's a pretty cool story. You go from GS2 to only the second Asian American deputy secretary in history.
Wow.
And so government work is in my blood. And so I've spent well over 20 years in government, and I've had stints obviously doing other things, but when I had the opportunity under President Biden to come back and serve, I didn't hesitate to say yes. I mean, I genuinely believe that there is no better way to make an impact on people's lives than working for the government, which is why I'm so appreciative of the work you all do at SBA and why I love doing events like this.
Yeah, no, and Ambassador, yeah, I do think, and it's interesting because some, as I've talked with folks over time as well, one of the things that we I think want to do more of is encourage Asian Americans, NHPI community, youth to think about public service as a career. And I, like you, I'm reminded. I mean, as you were recounting your story of sort of inspiration. When I was growing up in Eastern Washington, when I was pretty young, elementary school, I would spend summers with my great grandfather and great grandmother, sort of family childcare, and he had a very strong loyalty and a feeling, a debt of gratitude to then Congressman Tom Foley from our region, in part because Congressman Foley his office had helped him with some immigration issues at the time, and helped connect him with the right folks. And ever since then, he would every winter he would send him a fruitcake. And now, the fruitcake was terrible, but nonetheless, he would send the fruitcake every winter to Congressman Foley, and Congressman Foley would write him a little hand note, thank you, and it was, in some ways, you're just a kid, but a little bit of that orientation towards interest in government, and he, and of course he would also, send, aside from our official duties, he would send some small political contributions to the congressman as well. And I just remember as a kid just seeing all these, this political mail come in, and didn't really think much of it. But in hindsight, now thinking back, there might have been some, subliminal messaging, and just you just start to take an interest in some of those issues as a kid while growing up, and next thing you know, like I end up with a 22-decade career in public service as well. But but those stories are, I think, really insightful and really helpful, and I appreciate you sharing a little bit of that backstory. Now, back to just kind of some of the issues and things that you've seen over time, and I mean, you were both co-chair of the White House Initiative, and I also read that there was an article that you had written back in 2017 about some of the challenges with the lack of and you touched on this earlier too, the invisibility of the API community, and in this case, in this article in 2017, you were talking about visibility of members of our community on television and in media, and just kind of the lack of the presence 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I'm curious of your thoughts in terms of do you think that we have made more progress in the last couple of years? How are those issues still manifesting as far as your perspective, and maybe even thinking a little further back, what are some of the highlights of things that you see where we've made some progress on, and where do you see there's still some challenges though that we should be collectively thinking about?
Yeah, representation really matters, and representation matters whether you're talking about politics or you're talking about entertainment. I mean, one of the great treats I had, probably in 2014, 2015, is I was asked to moderate a panel discussion with the cast of a brand new TV show that was going to feature Asian Americans, and it was the show Fresh Off the Boat, and it was before it aired on TV, and that was groundbreaking, and that was the first show featuring an Asian American family since Margaret Cho did All American Family 20 years earlier. And since then we've not only had shows like that, but we've obviously had movies like Crazy Rich Asians. We now have a Asian American Marvel superhero. So we're making progress, but the numbers are still not where they should be. I am conscious though, when I'm watching TV, I do see a lot more commercials featuring diverse faces, and I do think that matters, because I do think that's the face of America. I think in particular when you look at the number of, I've noticed this very distinctly, the number of interracial couples that are now in TV ads, which I think is important, because that really is that's what our nation looks like. I will say though that in other aspects that we're not doing enough. The piece I wrote in 2017 really came out of I spent most of the previous administration, this one before the one we're in now, doing TV commentary. I did something like 800 TV appearances, and the vast majority of them, I was the only person of color, and almost always was I the only Asian American. and I not only saw that because I saw the number of commentators that were on, but the number of news anchors of people that look like us. I mean, really, at that point, it really was Richard Louis on MSNBC. And Richard was an incredible champion for us. And I remember there was one random Saturday or Sunday afternoon where, if you all watch a lot of cable news, you see kind of all the talking heads. And because Richard had a say in it, Richard picked 4 panelists who are all Asian Americans. And I think when we got on there and saw the screen of all the different boxes and it was all Asian, we're like, whoa, this is kind of a big deal. And yet we don't think twice when we see the boxes with all white faces. And I think the fact that we still find that unusual, I think talks about, how far we have to go. And it's not just seeing Asian American faces that matters. It's the perspective that they bring to the issues. And I think when you don't have representation, you also leave out an important perspective that's part of these stories as well. And so I'm always like mindful of these things. And so I'm going to continue to push envelopes. I'm going to continue to encourage people to go into areas that they've never done before, because we need Asian Americans in more professions at the highest levels.
No, I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm really glad we're kind of emphasizing that point, and certainly just again an acknowledgement that your distinguished career is part of helping us have that visibility and representation. So thank you again for everything that you do for the community. Ambassador, this wasn't really one of the questions that we had talked about ahead of time, but I'm going to toss it out there anyway. And
whatever you want to ask Mike, I will answer.
Perfect. So while we have you, I just kind of wonder if it might be insightful to. I mean, you have had such an interesting career and been in the room for so many interesting conversations and decisions that have been made along the way that has impacted public policy, operations, other aspects of the federal policy making. I'm just curious if there's you pull the curtain back for us a little bit. If there's a particular war story or something that would be just fun for. I'll put it this way, for those of us on the call, so that we have something to share at a cocktail party someday that the ambassador shared with us. What you can indulge us for a few minutes on something that might be interesting, humorous, just insightful. Would really, I think we'd all really appreciate it. So.
Understanding that these stories may get shared, I do have to be careful what I share. But I will tell you that I've been fortunate to be at the table when important decisions were made. And I was with President Obama when he was a senator. President Obama and I are actually also law school classmates, so I've known him for a very long time. So I was in the rooms, when he was deciding to run for president. I was in the room in the White House when we were deciding on the Recovery Act package during the Great Recession, when we were making the important decisions around the Affordable Care Act. I've spent a lot of time with then Vice President Biden. Obviously, right now I've been in many high-level foreign policy discussions. I will say there's not a story that I can easily tell that doesn't get me in trouble. But what I will say is this. Having spent a lot of time with President Biden, President Obama, they're every bit as kind, decent, thoughtful people in person as they are in public. I have been there when then Vice President Biden would hear a story of somebody in pain or who had gone through something, and he would stop, listen, console, hug, laugh, tell a joke. I mean, that's who he is. I've been there. I've literally been there when he has picked up, when somebody said, hey, it's my mom's birthday, and he'll pick up the phone and say, hey, let's call your mom together. I've been there with President Obama. We used to always laugh because when we were in the White House staffers who leave are able to take a photo with the president before they leave, and you can bring your families in. And the running joke was always, hey, whether you have a kid or don't have a kid, bring a kid in, because the President Obama loves children and he loves babies. And I think that's the thing that both Obama and Biden shared. And I've seen President Obama on his hands and knees playing with babies. I've seen them at the moments when there were no cameras there were no public. It was just them being themselves with their families. And these are decent people. And I would actually go broader. I mean, I've spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill. I've spent a lot of time in government. Public service is hard. And look, we get into all kinds of partisan arguments. And yet I've seen people on both sides of the aisle in private. These are people who are by and large, genuinely decent people who are trying to do the right thing. And that's why I have the utmost respect for people that go into this line of work, regardless of what political party you are in, because doing the things that we do entail no small amount of sacrifice in our lives. I mean, these are just not easy jobs when you get to this level of government.
Well, that's a great segue to what'll be my last question, and then we can open things up a little bit. Is that given that incredible insight and sort of your observations over time, what advice do you have for well, just all public servants, but particularly for AA and HPI public servants at all levels of government. Just your closing thoughts here on that would be very helpful for us to think about. So.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have consciously not allowed myself to be hemmed in or constrained by what is possible. That the fact that, there are not a lot of Asian role models in some of the jobs I've chosen, that's okay. And if I'm the one that has to break down the barriers, great. I'm not going to be hemmed in by what I think is possible or not possible. I'm just going to keep pushing. So I always encourage people, get out of your element, try new things. Don't be afraid to fail. So that's lesson number one. I think lesson number two, find good mentors. I have been very lucky to have people who have guided me in my career. And there's no way that I will ever repay them, but I try to pay it forward by helping other young people starting out, and doing talks like this where I can encourage people along the way. Not that I'm at the end of my career, but I'm probably closer to the end of my career than the beginning of my career. And I hope that, some of the doors that I've helped open, and really there's not me opening, there are people like Norm Mineta and Gary Locke and Dan Inouye and, others who have opened them well before me. And I'm just kind of walking through and trying to widen the doors a little bit more. I mean, I hope more people can, we'll see this and be inspired and say, hey, I want to go try something new. I want to get into an area where there aren't a lot of Asian Americans. So get out of your element. Don't be afraid to fail. Find good mentors. And then I guess my other piece of advice, and this is just, I think, a good piece of advice in life, just be nice, be a good person. I mean, it takes no effort to be kind than to be unkind. And I genuinely believe good, decent people succeed in life, and they especially succeed in public service. And I've had the pleasure of working with Joe Biden and Barack Obama. So I've seen how good, smart people who work hard and care about doing the right thing do get ahead. So that's what I would encourage people to do.
That's great. And Ambassador, thank you. It's a great advice. It's also remarkably, it maps right back to where we started about in your comments are consistent with even just for our own agency's purposes, as the administrators encouraged us. We want to be entrepreneurial in our work too, in terms of being as entrepreneurial as the small businesses that we serve, and whether that is in relation to our own personal journey or how we put our best foot forward to help small businesses recover from the pandemic. Particularly in the space around equity, we are widening some doors and hopefully creating some new ones to help folks get what they need. So I really appreciate that and can relate very directly to your comments. And of course, being nice is well, that makes a lot of sense. So thank you again, Ambassador. So I think we are right at the point where we have some folks on watching us live today. I think we're going to go ahead and turn it over to if there are any questions. And I'm looking to the team here a little bit. Are we just asking folks to send questions in the chat, or is someone helping to facilitate some of that Q&A for us?
It looks like we have two in the chat already.
Oh,
Mike, I don't know how other
okay.
people can submit, but we do have two in there.
All right, well, let's start with those then. And so I do see one where question is 2022 theme for AA and HPI month was set by the Federal Asian American Council's Advancing Leaders Through Collaboration. Can you share one or two ideas on how this may be achieved?
I'll be honest, I don't actually understand what this theme is, so I'll leave it. I'm being flippant. I think what it's saying is it is incumbent upon us to help each other and to lift each other up. And I do think it goes back to the concept of mentoring others. Now, here's the thing where I guess I disagree with the theme. I have mentored many people, Some of them have been Asian American, not all of them have been Asian American, and I don't just mentor Asian American people. So I do think it's important about all of us to help the next generation, but I think it's also important for us to help each other, even if we're at the same level. So I think that's the level of collaboration, and I do think, you know, we as Asian Americans can support each other in these challenging roles. But I would say this, which is, we can find allies anywhere. Allies just don't have to be Asian Americans. When I was in the White House, my closest friend, my closest ally was Cecilia Munoz, the president's domestic policy advisor. Cecilia was a Latina, and we would just go into each other's offices, close the door, and say, God, I just said something really stupid, you know, or boy, I think I'm gonna get fired, or boy, like, why didn't I get invited to that meeting in the Oval Office? And you need allies. So I guess the question I'd say is, yes, you can find allies among Asian Americans, but I think in general, finding allies, finding people who can support you either above your level and then paying it forward, I think is important. And I think that's what I take, you know, notwithstanding my flippant answer at the beginning. That's what I think. I mean, we all lift ourselves up, but we can also help lift other people. I always say that, you know, I was taught that when I climb the ladder of opportunity, when I get to the top of the ladder, I don't pull the ladder up so nobody else can join me. I lend a hand to the next person coming back up, and that's what I've tried to do.
Great. All right. Next question is, you know, what is the single most important thing that all people can do to advance A and HPI initiatives throughout the federal sector as well as in society more broadly?
So I don't know if it's the single most, but I would say an important thing, and it ties to something you said, Mike, at the outset. Mm-hmm. Our community is not a monolithic community. Yeah. There are dozens of different subgroups. While I acknowledge and I appreciate that we now include Native Hawaiians, part of the reason why I don't use this bulky term, A, it's hard to say, but B, like, if we start listing every subgroup, we would have like AA plus 20 other letters that go after that. And I think that reflects the diversity of our community. Mm-hmm. People forget the term Asian American was a political construct that was created in the late 60s, early 1970s, because like my parents' generation don't think of themselves as Asian American. They're Chinese Americans, mm-hmm. or they're Chinese. And that's distinct from Korean American. That's certainly distinct in my mother's mind from Indian American, Native Hawaiian. But we've understood that in order for us to have a measure of political power and collaboration, there's value in all coming together. The challenge, and while that's important politically, the challenge when it comes to government work is that we are not a monolithic community. We have parts of our community that are doing incredibly well and parts that are not doing well. You know, on balance, our community is healthier, wealthier, more educated, more established than any other racial group. But when you start to slice and dice it, you see those disparities. You see, you know, Japanese Americans that have been here for generations are at one level. Indian Americans who work in Silicon Valley are at that level. You see more recent immigrants from Southeast Asia that are at another level. Or here in New York City, you go to Chinatown, and if you look among Chinese Americans in Chinatown, their high school dropout rate, their poverty rate is higher than every other racial group in the city. So what I'm saying to folks is, when you lump all of us together, you often miss the disparities in our community. And I think we as policymakers often say, well, you know, the Asian American community, they're doing great, so we don't need to send federal services to them. That's not true. Maybe Mike, you and I don't need federal services, right, but there are a lot of people that do. And so go beneath just the title Asian American, and you start to see that this is a community that has really deep pockets of disparity. I'll give you one tangible example from when I was running when I was the co-chair of the White House API initiative during the Obama administration. So in 2010, we had the oil spill in the Gulf Coast, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. There was a rush of federal services, including from SBA down there to help farmers and fishermen and hotel owners that were all being devastated. One of the most devastated parts of the community were fishermen and shrimpers from Vietnam and Thailand and other places in Southeast Asia. And that was a community that was barely subsisting, and they were just devastated by this flood. And when we first sent resources down to the Gulf Coast, we didn't understand. These are not people who speak really fluent English. These are not people who understand how to navigate the federal system. So if you look at this community, if you look at those people as part of a broader, well-established Asian American community, you miss the fact that these are not like you and me, Mike. These are, and you need extra assistance. So that's what I would simply say to people. We are not a monolithic community, and you need to understand that in terms of developing programs and providing services to our community.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, and I think that's really sound advice, and it's important for us to keep that at the forefront of our minds as we do our work, because it can lose some of the granularity and the distinction and the disaggregated information that really tells us what the story in a much more informative way. So
and I'll say that's one of the remarkable achievements in the Affordable Care Act, where we asked in the Affordable Care Act, we required that data about Asian Americans be reported not just as Asian Americans, but in like 6 or 7 different subgroups. So we now know about Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, Vietnamese Americans in the Affordable Care Act and healthcare. And that's important to start getting beneath the surface. And we need to do that far more as federal policymakers.
Mike, this is Rob Webb. I believe Erin has some, she's monitoring the question and answer for the live attendees. And I believe she's got a couple of questions to ask. I think she'll specify whether it's for the ambassador or for you. So Erin, take it away, please.
Sure. Good afternoon. So I have a question in the chat. It looks like it's just a general question, and it wants to know, can you please provide us the AANHPI statistics and SBA AANHPI statistics in a written format?
I'm sure we could, and by the AANHPI statistics, maybe just a point of clarification, and we can circle back to it later. Are we talking about internal within the organization, or are we talking about the businesses and the business community that we serve, I guess? So
it's fairly vague, so maybe it's asking for statistics from businesses as opposed to just general.
Well, we do have some good data we could probably pull and share. I don't have any particular data points that share off the top of my head, but yeah, and I know, for instance, one area that, since we're on this topic of disaggregated data, one very interesting one to mention as another example is, I have found the disaggregated data around government contracting to be really interesting as well. I mean, in terms of given our interests as an agency to support the work with statutory set-asides for small businesses from disadvantaged communities, when we pull the curtain back and disaggregate the data to see what's really happening in terms of the percentage of businesses from certain demographic groups relative to that are getting government contracts relative to their number of small businesses in the United States, we see largely across the board still work that we need to do. So I know that data exists, and certainly we can go deeper in terms of disaggregating information to help us get a better sense of what's happening out there, really. So.
All right, thank you. We also have another question in the chat, and it's based on the mass shooting in California. It was reported that the shooter was upset about political tensions between China and Taiwan. Can you briefly describe the political tension between the two? That's for the ambassador.
Happy to do that. That's probably more than I could do in the 5 minutes we have left. But let me answer the question this way, which is, as disturbing as it has been to see the rise of hate-related incidents over the last couple of years because of COVID, I do think the situation is going to get worse because there is a strong anti-China sentiment right now in the United States. And I think it's this is a hard issue because we as in the United States have are really in a strategic competition with China. We have many issues that we strongly disagree with them on. In many ways, they are our greatest competitor right now. And so it is understandable when people take positions that are anti-China. The problem is it's different to be anti-China than anti-Chinese American or anti-Asian American. And all of this gets conflated together. And, you know, the history of Asians in America, I would say, is not a very pretty picture. You know, we had a Chinese Exclusion Act that was passed in 1883 that essentially prohibited Asian immigration for 80 years. We obviously have Japanese American internment. We have tensions against Koreans during the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and then obviously, you know, in the 70s and 80s with the rise of Japan and Japanese automakers, there was that tension. So I think what it speaks to is that our community throughout history has been viewed as an outsider. And no matter, and this is something that I'm very conscious of, my father taught me, no matter how well your English is, no matter how educated you are, what position you reach, if you're just walking down the street, somebody sees you as an outsider, as a Chinese person, as, you know, people don't know until I open my mouth. It's not entirely clear where I'm from or if I'm native or not. And we need to be aware that we can both oppose what China is doing, but not stigmatize Chinese Americans, Asian Americans. And I think and so I think as this anti-China rhetoric goes up, I'm concerned about what that means for our community.
Yeah, no, and Chris, that is such an important point, and one that I too have been doing some thinking about in terms of this. There is this notion of perpetual foreigner that I think that for our community that happens more often than not. And I mean, that in of itself could be an hour-long topic of discussion, but I think it's a good one to just kind of put a pin in, because that is are some dynamics that are very unique to the AA and HPI community that that's worth a more robust conversation around. So Judette, I think we had one more, or I know we're running close to the end here. So it looks like you've popped on the screen. I can turn it over to you for a second here.
Yeah. So thank you, Mike. I just wanted to add to that one particular question concerning the makeup of our AA and HPI employee workforce here at the SBA. So at the end of fiscal year 2021, 6.86% of our workforce comprised of Asian employee, that's including male and female, and only 0.21% of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders. Now, as Sherry mentioned in the beginning of the program, this is relatively good as compared to the civilian labor force. So in terms of participation rate for the community that we are talking about, SBA is doing well. Okay. Erin, are there any more questions?
No, Judette, I don't see any additional questions this time.
Okay, thanks, Erin. Okay, so we have come to the end of our program. I tell you, it has been a wonderful experience listening to Ambassador Liu and the wonderful conversation that he shared with Mike with us. So Mike, Chris, on behalf of the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Civil Rights, headed by Dr. Zena Such, and Administrator Guzman, I would like to thank you both for lending of your time this afternoon to share with us your thoughts on AANHPI. And I have to say that really slow this afternoon. Mike, again, I'd like to thank you so much for that plug for employee resource groups. I want to say that I have been soliciting employees who are interested in forming additional ERG groups here within the agency. Remember, these are groups that are for employees and that are led by employees. At the end of the day, SBA truly wants to be that inclusive employer where all are welcome at the table. So if you have an interest in joining any ERG, whether those that have been established or you're interested in forming a new one, please feel free to reach out to me and I will be happy. We have some executive champions just willing to assist where they can. So please keep that in mind as you go this afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day. We certainly appreciate your participation, your attendance in today's program. And like I said, the recorded event will be posted on our SharePoint site for you to view later or share with those who have not been able to attend this afternoon. Thank you and have a great afternoon.
Right.
This concludes our program.